$5 million for your life." The words hung in the air of the luxurious living room like a verdict that would forever alter two destinies. Emma Sullivan felt her heart stop for a moment, her hands trembling as she held the fine Chinese porcelain cup she hadn't even sipped from. The aroma of jasmine tea floated in the air, mingling with the subtle scent of rich wood that permeated the room. Just an hour ago, she had been performing street tricks for a few coins to buy dinner. Now, sitting in a chair likely worth more than everything she'd ever owned, she stared at one of the richest men in the city as he made a proposal that defied all logic. Michael Bennett was not a man who took no for an answer. At 45, his financial empire stood as a living testament to his relentless determination. But on that autumn morning, as he studied the disheveled young woman sitting before him, there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability none of his associates had ever witnessed. The October sunlight poured through the towering French windows, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. Outside, golden leaves swirled in the air like ballerinas performing a silent dance. It was a day like any other for the rest of the world, but for these two lonely souls, it marked the moment destiny chose to intervene in an extraordinary way. "I don't understand," Emma murmured, her voice barely concealing its tremor. "Why me?" The billionaire rose from his Italian leather chair, his firm footsteps echoing against the marble floor as he walked toward the window. Below, people looked like ants, each scurrying after their own dreams and needs. But up here, on the 20th floor of his urban mansion, time seemed frozen in a pivotal moment. "Because you have nothing?" he replied with a brutal honesty that made her shrink back. "And yet, you have everything I need." The story that brought them to this moment had begun 3 weeks earlier, when Michael received an ultimatum from his doctors. Dr. Anderson had been blunt. "Your heart is overworked, Mr. Bennett. The constant stress and loneliness aren't helping. We need to focus on quality of life now." Without an heir, his entire empire, built through decades of obsessive work, would be lost to familial disputes after his death. The diagnosis wasn't terminal, but it served as a cruel reminder of his mortality and isolation. The nights grew longer after that day. Michael spent countless hours in his office, reliving every choice that had brought him to this point. He thought of Claire, his first love in college, who left him when he chose to spend his nights with accounting books rather than romantic dinners. Of Rebecca, who had almost become his wife, until he discovered her secret deal with his main competitor. And of Sophia, his last attempt at something real, who asked about his will on their second date. It was then that he saw her for the first time, through the window of his office. A young woman juggling on the corner, smiling genuinely at passers-by, even as they ignored her. Her dark brown hair danced in the wind, and there was a dignity in her posture that stood in stark contrast to her worn clothes. Day after day, he watched her, intrigued by her persistence, by the light that seemed to emanate from her even in the face of such adversity. Emma was 23, but her eyes carried the weight of a lifetime of struggles. Abandoned at an orphanage when she was 5, her only memories of her mother were the scent of lavender and a half-forgotten lullaby. She had grown up moving between foster homes and shelters, learning early on that the world rarely offers second chances. At 12, she discovered juggling at a social circus workshop, one of the few happy memories she carried. The art of keeping multiple balls in the air became a metaphor for her own life, a constant exercise in balance, focus, and hope. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. Michael turned to face her, his steel gray blue eyes piercing. The sunlight now illuminated his face, revealing the worry lines on his forehead and the silver streaks at his temples. Marks of a life dedicated to building an empire that now threatened to crumble without an heir to carry it forward. "I want a child. An heir. And I'm willing to pay $5 million to the woman who agrees to bear it for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stood abruptly, staggering as if she'd been struck. Her thoughts swirled in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: shock, indignation, temptation, fear. The teacup trembled on its saucer, creating a nervous melody of clinking porcelain. "This is..." she began, but the words died in her throat. "A contract," Michael finished, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "You would live here during the pregnancy, have access to the best medical care, clothing, food. After the birth, the money would be yours to do whatever you wish. A new life, Emma. A chance to never go hungry or cold again." Tears began to stream down Emma's face before she even realized she was crying. They weren't tears of sadness or joy, they were tears of sheer emotional overload. In her mind, flashes of nights spent in crowded shelters mingled with unfulfilled dreams of a different life. Her entire existence had been a struggle for survival, one day at a time, never knowing if there would be food the next day or a roof over her head the following week. And the child? Her voice came out as a whisper. Would stay with me as my legitimate heir. The response was swift and definitive, carrying the weight of a decision long considered. Emma walked to the window, her unsteady steps sinking into the Persian carpet that could feed a family for months. Outside, her old life carried on. Hurried people, honking cars, the world spinning oblivious to the moment that would forever change the destiny of two lonely souls. On the corner where she used to perform, another street artist had taken her place, the colorful balls tracing arcs in the air as she had just hours ago. Why not look for someone? Someone from your social circle? She asked, still facing the window, staring at the city that had always treated her with indifference. Michael let out a bitter laugh, the sound carrying years of disappointments and betrayals. I tried. 3 failed engagements and countless empty relationships later, I learned that money only attracts more interest in money. You, he paused meaningfully, have nothing to gain beyond what I'm openly offering. Emma turned slowly, facing the man who was offering to change her life with an agreement that defied every conventional moral code. In his eyes, beyond the mask of corporate coldness, she saw something familiar, the same loneliness that had shadowed her since childhood. It was a distorted mirror of her own pain, reflected through the lens of privilege and power. If I accept, she began, her voice finding a firmness she didn't know she possessed, I want everything in writing. And I want guarantees. A faint smile tugged at the corners of Michael's lips, the first she had seen since entering the room. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes but momentarily softened his austere features. Naturally. I am a businessman after all. He walked over to his massive mahogany desk and pressed a button on the intercom. Martha, call my lawyer. And prepare the blue room for our new resident. Yes, she said simply. I accept. Martha entered the room silently, her experienced hands already carrying a folder filled with documents. Her eyes met Emma's briefly, conveying a mixture of compassion and concern. In her 30 years as the Bennett mansion's housekeeper, she had witnessed many things but nothing quite like this. What none of the people in that room could have imagined at that moment was that this agreement, born of loneliness and despair, would be just the first chapter of a story that would transcend any contract. A story about how destiny sometimes chooses the most unlikely paths to unite two broken souls, turning a cold commercial deal into something much deeper and truer. A story about how, sometimes, you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. The blue room was larger than any apartment Emma had ever lived in. The walls, painted in a soft sky blue hue, seemed to embrace the space with a serenity that sharply contrasted the turmoil in her heart. A king-size canopy bed dominated the center of the room, draped in Egyptian cotton sheets so soft they felt like clouds beneath her trembling fingers. Martha, the gray-haired housekeeper with kind eyes, had spent the last hour showing Emma where to find everything she might need. The closet is already stocked with a few basic pieces, she explained, opening the double doors of a wardrobe that seemed endless. Mr. Bennett has arranged for a personal shopper tomorrow. He insists you have a wardrobe suitable for your new position. New position. The words felt like stones in Emma's stomach. What exactly was she now? A surrogate? A guest? An employee with the most unusual job in the world? Martha, Emma called out as the housekeeper was about to leave, how long have you worked for Mr. Bennett? The older woman paused in the doorway, a small smile appearing on her lips. 15 years. I've seen a lot happen in this house, dear. But nothing like this. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching the soft fabric of the new dress Martha had given her. What is he really like? She asked quietly. Martha considered the question for a moment, closing the door and stepping back a few paces. Mr. Bennett is complex. He's not an easy man to know. Life had taught him to build high walls around himself. She paused, carefully choosing her next words. But there's kindness in him even if he tries to hide it. Dinner would be served in 2 hours, and Emma used the time to indulge in a long bath, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in years. The hot water cascaded over her shoulders like a blessing, washing away not only the physical grime but also layers of worry that had built up over the years. As she dressed, her eyes caught her reflection in the massive bathroom mirror. The navy blue dress, simple yet elegant, transformed her appearance in a way that made her barely recognize herself. Her hair, now clean and brushed, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Who was this woman in the mirror, so different from the street artist she had been just hours ago? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting to see Martha. To her surprise, it was Michael who appeared in the doorway. He had traded his business suit for dark slacks and a gray sweater that softened his usually austere demeanor. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "The dress suits you," he finally remarked, his voice gentler than usual. "Thank you," Emma replied, resisting the urge to cross her arms over her chest. "Everything here is more than I could have imagined." Michael stepped further into the room, his hands in his pockets in a gesture that made him seem almost vulnerable. "Have you had a chance to read the contract?" Emma nodded, gesturing toward the pages on the side table. The document was extensive and detailed, covering every possible aspect of the agreement. $5 million. Premium medical care. Absolute discretion. And, in the end, the complete relinquishment of any rights to the child. "I have some questions," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. A faint smile touched Michael's lips. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. The contract states that I'm to live here throughout the pregnancy," Emma began, settling into one of the armchairs by the window. "But what exactly does that mean? Am I a prisoner?" Michael moved closer, taking the armchair opposite hers. The evening light poured through the window, casting golden shadows across his profile. "No, you're not a prisoner. You can go out, see friends, live your life. I only ask for discretion and for you to take care of your health, and the babies." Emma took in the information, her fingers idly playing with the hem of her dress. "And after? When it's all over, how does it work?" "The money will be transferred to an account in your name as soon as the baby is born. You'll have time to recover properly and then—" He paused, his voice losing some of its usual certainty. "Then we go our separate ways." The silence that followed was filled with the distant hum of the city outside. Emma studied the man in front of her, powerful, determined, and yet somehow just as lonely as she was. "Why a baby?" she asked softly. "Why now?" Michael stood, walking to the window. For a long moment, he simply stared at the setting sun over the city. "I have everything money can buy," he finally said, his voice carrying a note of bitterness. "An empire built with hard work and sacrifices. But what's the point of it all without someone to leave it to?" Emma felt her heart tighten at the loneliness evident in his words. "And you never thought about just falling in love? Starting a family the traditional way?" A humorless laugh escaped his lips. "I tried. 3 times. Each one taught me that love and money rarely walk hand in hand without conflict." He turned to face her. "That's why I chose you, Emma. You're the only one who was honest from the start about your motivations." The raw sincerity of that confession hit her hard. It was true, she was there for the money, for the chance at a better life. There were no pretensions or games in their arrangement. "Dinner will be served in half an hour," Michael said, walking toward the door. "Martha will come to get you." He stopped in the doorway, turning one last time. "And Emma? Welcome to your new life." After he left, Emma remained seated, watching the city lights begin to flicker in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there was her old life, the familiar streets, the known faces, the daily struggles. In here, a new world unfolded before her, full of possibilities and uncertainties. Her hand unconsciously rested on her still flat belly. Soon, a new life would begin to grow there. A life that would change not only her future but also Michael Bennett's. The thought should have scared her more than it actually did. Martha returned promptly to take her to dinner. As she followed the housekeeper down the elegant halls of the mansion, Emma realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was no longer alone on her journey. As strange as her arrangement with Michael was, there was something comforting about being part of something bigger than herself. The sound of their soft footsteps on the marble floor marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter that promised more surprises than either of them could have imagined. In the dining room, a table set for 2 awaited, symbolizing the start of a journey that would forever transform not only their lives but also their hearts. The first rays of December's sun danced through the blue room's curtains, where Emma woke with her hand resting on her gently rounded belly. 3 months had passed since that afternoon that changed her life, and her body was beginning to show the signs of the new life growing inside her. The morning brought with it not only the nausea that had become part of her routine but also the anxiety of the first ultrasound. Michael had insisted on the best specialist in the city, and Emma still found herself surprised by how he took care of every detail, despite maintaining his usual emotional distance. "Good morning, dear." Martha entered the room with a tray. The aroma of toast and ginger tea filled the air. "Mr. Bennett asked if you're ready for breakfast on the porch." Emma sat up in bed, surprised. In recent weeks, Michael had rarely been home for breakfast, always busy with morning meetings. "Doesn't he have work today?" He canceled all his morning appointments, Martha replied with a small smile. He said the first image of his son deserves his full attention. Emma's heart skipped a beat. His son. The way Michael referred to the baby always left her with conflicting feelings. To him it was his heir. To her, well, she was still struggling to define what she felt. On the porch, the table was set for two. Michael was already there, wearing a navy blue sweater that softened his usually austere features. Over the past few months, Emma had noticed subtle changes in him. Moments of vulnerability that slipped through the cracks of his emotional armor. "How are you feeling?" he asked as she sat down. "Nervous," Emma admitted, helping herself to some toast. "And a bit nauseous, but Martha says it's normal." Michael nodded, his eyes briefly fixed on his coffee cup. "My mom used to say morning sickness was a sign of a healthy baby." It was the first time he mentioned his family, and Emma noticed how his voice softened when he spoke of his mother. "You don't talk much about your family," she remarked softly. A heavy silence fell over the porch. For a moment, Emma thought she had crossed an invisible line. But then Michael surprised her, carefully placing his cup on the table. "I lost my mom when I was 12, he said, his voice carrying an old pain. "Cancer. My dad. Well, he lost himself in alcohol after that. I built everything I have on my own, promising myself that my children would have a different life." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't just the pregnancy hormones, it was the sudden understanding that behind the cold billionaire was a boy who still carried his own scars. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was a long time ago," Michael replied, but his eyes betrayed the emotion his words tried to hide. The drive to the clinic was made in contemplative silence. In the luxurious car, Emma watched the city pass by the window, thinking about how her life had changed. It wasn't just the material comfort. It was the strange feeling of belonging to something, even if temporarily. Dr. Sarah Chin greeted them with a warm smile. Her office was an oasis of tranquility, decorated in soft tones that calmed the nerves. Emma lay on the examination table, her heart pounding as the doctor prepared the equipment. "Let's see how this baby is doing," Dr. Chin said, applying gel to her belly. Michael stood next to the table, his hands lightly gripping the metal railing. Emma could feel his tension even without looking at him. The sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong, fast, vibrating with life. "Wait a moment." Dr. Chin furrowed her brow, moving the transducer. "I'll look at that. Looks like we have a surprise here. Is something wrong?" Michael asked immediately, his voice tense. The doctor smiled, turning the screen so they could both see better. "On the contrary. I'm seeing 2 heartbeats. Congratulations, you're expecting twins?" The world seemed to stop for a moment. Emma felt her breath catch, while Michael staggered slightly, needing to lean against the wall. "Twins." The word hung in the air like a transformative revelation. "Two?" Emma whispered, her hand instinctively finding her belly. "Yes, and they both seem perfectly healthy," Dr. Chin confirmed, pointing to the screen. "Look, here's the first baby, and here, slightly hidden behind, is the second." Emma looked at Michael, expecting to see concern or even anger. After all, this wasn't in the contract. Instead, she saw something she had never seen before on his face, unshed tears shining in his eyes. "2 children," he murmured, and for the first time since Emma had met him, a genuine smile lit up his face. On the way home, the silence in the car felt different. It was no longer the formal distance that usually separated them, but a space filled with unspoken possibilities. "The contract," Emma finally said, her voice low. "It only mentions 1 baby." Michael turned to her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "The contract can be adjusted. Unless, you don't want to continue?" "It's not that," Emma replied quickly, surprising herself with the strength of her reaction. "It's just that, everything feels more real now. More intense." "I know," Michael said softly. After a moment he added, "My mom was a twin. She always said there was a special connection between them, something no one else could understand." Emma smiled, touched by this new personal revelation. "Do you think they'll have that too?" "I'm sure they will," he replied, and for the first time, his voice carried not only certainty but also hope. That night, alone in her room, Emma spent hours staring at the ultrasound images. 2 tiny lives growing together inside her. 2 souls that would change not only her future but also the seemingly impenetrable heart of Michael Bennett. Martha found her like this, lost in thought, and sat down beside her on the bed. "You know," the housekeeper said softly, "in all these years, I've never seen Mr. Bennett look at anything the way he looked at that screen today. As if he'd finally found something he'd been searching for a long time." Emma nodded, fully understanding what Martha meant. because she had felt it too. That moment in the clinic had changed something fundamental between them. As if fate, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that a cold contract was not enough to contain all the love that was yet to come. Winter had transformed the Bennett mansion into a cozy refuge against the biting cold. Snowflakes danced gently outside the windows, creating a scene that seemed straight out of a postcard. Inside, the warmth didn't only come from the sophisticated heating systems but from something deeper and more unexpected. A subtle change in the atmosphere that neither Emma nor Michael could ignore. In her 5th month of pregnancy, Emma discovered she was carrying a boy and a girl. The news came on a particularly cold morning in January, during an appointment that would change everything. Dr. Chen's office was quiet that morning, with only the soft hum of the ultrasound machine filling the room. "Look," the doctor said with a warm smile, "your boy is here, and look, your little girl is hiding right here." Tears came without warning, first in Emma's eyes, then, surprisingly, in Michael's. It was a moment of shared vulnerability that transcended any contract or previous agreement. That night, during dinner at the mansion, Michael broke the contemplative silence that surrounded them. "Thomas and Sophie," he said softly, the names carrying weight in his voice. Emma lifted her eyes from her plate, noticing how the soft light from the chandelier cast delicate shadows on his face, softening his usually stern features. "Those are beautiful names," she replied. "Do they have a special meaning?" Michael set down his utensils, his restless hands adjusting the linen napkin, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as a sign of contained emotion. "Thomas was the name of my uncle, my mother's twin brother. And Sophie," his voice faltered slightly, "was her name." The silence that followed was filled with mutual understanding. Emma felt her heart tighten with the depth of the pain still present in his voice. "Tell me about her," she asked gently, extending her hand across the table in an instinctive gesture of comfort. To her surprise, Michael began to speak, his words flowing like a river after a long drought. He talked about Sundays filled with the smell of homemade pancakes, about stories told under the soft glow of a bedside lamp before bed, about a woman who found beauty in the smallest things and believed that smiles had healing power. She had a garden, he continued, his eyes lost in distant memories. Small but full of life. She used to say that each flower had its own personality just like people. She spent hours teaching me the names of each one. Emma pictured that boy, so different from the man before her, learning about flowers with his mother. The image brought a tender smile to her lips. She used to say life is like a puzzle, Michael went on, his voice softer. Sometimes the pieces don't seem to fit, but in the end it all makes sense. Even after all these years, I still try to believe that. The days that followed brought a new dynamic to the mansion. Michael began working more from home, setting up a temporary office overlooking the winter garden where Emma used to spend her afternoons. His eyes often sought her figure as she walked among the plants or read in her favorite armchair. Conversations, once limited to practical matters about the pregnancy, began to deepen. They talked about books, music, old dreams. Emma discovered that Michael played the piano, though he hadn't in years. He learned that she had always wanted to study literature, a dream interrupted by the harshness of life. One particularly cold afternoon, Emma found Michael in the library, surrounded by family albums. Wordlessly, he made space for her on the leather sofa, sharing memories captured on aged paper. "This is the last photo I have with her," he said, showing an image he clearly held dear. A boy with a bright smile next to a woman with gentle eyes and dark hair like his. It was taken a week before the diagnosis. At that moment, Emma felt the baby's move as if responding to the emotion in the air. Without thinking, she took Michael's hand and guided it to her belly. "Can you feel that? I think they want to meet their grandmother too." The moment the twins kicked against Michael's palm was transformative. His eyes filled with unshed tears, and his face lit up with a smile that erased years of loneliness from his features. "It's incredible," he whispered, keeping his hand in place even after the babies had settled. "It's like she's here somehow." Martha, who happened to be passing by the door at that moment, stopped silently to observe the scene. In her many years at the Bennett mansion, she had never seen her employer so truly present, so genuinely connected to someone. The weeks turned into months, bringing deeper and deeper changes. The twins' room came to life with soft shades of green and yellow, colors that Emma and Michael chose together after hours of friendly discussion. Michael insisted on being involved in every decision, from choosing the cribs to selecting the musical mobiles that would play the same lullabies his mother sang to him. One night, Emma found Michael alone in the nursery, focused on assembling one of the cribs. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong arms that were usually hidden beneath immaculate suits. Tools were scattered around him, and he gently refused any help from the staff. "I need to do this myself," he explained when Emma questioned him, not lifting his eyes from his work. "My father, he never built anything for me. He was always too busy or too drunk to care. I want my children to know that every detail of their lives was prepared with love." The word loved hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Emma sat in the rocking chair, one of the first pieces they had chosen together, watching Michael work. His skilled hands transformed loose pieces into something beautiful and meaningful, just as he himself was transforming before her eyes. "Sometimes," she began hesitantly, stroking her prominent belly, "I wonder if we're doing the right thing. Not because of the contract," she added quickly, seeing the worried look on his face, "but for them. How will we explain this to them one day?" Michael stopped his work, sitting on the floor next to her chair. The closeness made Emma's heart race, a reaction that had been happening more and more frequently. "With the truth," he said simply, his voice carrying a calm certainty. "That two lonely people found a unique way to create a family. That sometimes the most unlikely paths lead to the most perfect destinations." "Family," Emma repeated softly, the word carrying a weight she hadn't expected to feel. "It's funny how that word has taken on a completely new meaning in the past few months." "Yes, family," Michael confirmed, his hand finding hers. "Maybe not in the way the world expects, but family nonetheless." "Real. Ours." That night, after Emma retired for the evening, Michael remained in the nursery, lost in thought. The contract on his desk in his office seemed more and more like a strange document, disconnected from the reality that was blossoming beneath that roof. Martha found him there, contemplative in the dark, with only the soft light of the baby's night lamp illuminating the room. "You know, sir," she said with the familiarity of one who knew all the layers of pain and joy within that house, "sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as practical arrangements." Michael looked at his housekeeper, who for so long had been more than just an employee. She was a constant in his life, a silent witness to his journey. "What are you trying to say, Martha?" "That maybe fate has its own plans," she replied with a gentle smile. "And sometimes the heart finds its way even when the mind tries to stop it. Your mother used to say something like that, didn't she?" Martha's words stayed with him throughout the night, mingling with memories of his mother and thoughts of the future. What had begun as a contract was turning into something much deeper, much more real. Something no legal document could capture or contain. In her room, Emma was also awake, her hands gently caressing her belly as she watched the snow fall outside. Thomas and Sophie moved softly inside her, as if dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. She had come to the mansion expecting to find a financial solution to her life, but was discovering something far more valuable: the possibility of a true home, of a family that transcended blood ties or paper contracts. Spring arrived gently at the Bennett mansion, bringing with it not just the blossoming of flowers in the garden, but a deeper, more meaningful transformation within its walls. Emma, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, carried the twins with a mixture of pride and growing anxiety. Her body was changing every day, as was her heart. On a particularly mild morning, Emma found Michael in the garden, where he was personally overseeing the renovation of an old flower bed. His hands, usually occupied with business documents, were now covered in dirt as he planted small rose seedlings. They were her favorites, he explained when he noticed Emma approaching. "My mother used to say that roses need love just as much as people do." She would spend hours here, talking to her flowers as if they were old friends. Emma sat down on the stone bench nearby, her hands resting on her prominent belly. "You're different," she observed softly. "Lighter, perhaps?" Michael paused his work, looking at his hands now dirty with soil. "Maybe it's time to be different," he replied, his voice carrying a newfound softness. "Since I found out about the twins, I've been thinking a lot about the kind of father I want to be." A meaningful silence passed between them, filled only by the sound of birds singing and the gentle breeze swaying the newly planted flowers. Emma felt the babies move as they always did when they heard Michael's voice. "Yesterday I found this," Michael said, standing up and pulling an envelope from his shirt pocket. "They're letters my mother wrote to me before she passed. I never could bring myself to read them until now." Emma felt her heart tighten at the vulnerability in his voice. "Do you want to share?" Michael sat down next to her on the bench, the crumpled envelope in his hands trembling slightly. "She knew she was dying," he began, his voice low. "But instead of saying goodbye, she wrote about hope. About how true love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." As he read excerpts from the letters, Emma noticed how his voice changed, becoming softer, more emotional. The words of Sophie Bennett, written decades ago, seemed to build a bridge between past and present, between pain and healing. "My dear son," Michael read aloud, "never let the fear of abandonment stop you from loving. True love doesn't come with guarantees, but it's worth every risk. When you find someone who makes your heart open again, don't hesitate. Some people come into our lives in unexpected ways, bringing exactly what we need, even when we don't know we were looking for it." The words hung in the air between them, laden with a meaning neither of them was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Emma felt tears well up in her eyes, a mix of pregnancy hormones and genuine emotion. "Your mother seemed like a very wise woman," she said softly. "She was," Michael agreed, carefully tucking the letters away. "And now I understand more clearly what she was trying to teach me. About family, about love, about letting people in." At that moment, Thomas and Sophie, the twins who had already taken the names of two such meaningful people, began to move actively. Emma took Michael's hand and guided it to her belly, a gesture that had become natural between them. "It's like they know," she whispered. "Like they can feel when we're connected like this." Michael let his hand rest there, feeling the movements of their children. The contract that had initially brought them together seemed more and more distant, replaced by something much deeper and truer. "Emma," he began, his voice carrying a new intensity, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Martha appeared in the garden, her expression worried. "Mr. Bennett, there's an urgent call from the office." "The project in London?" Michael hesitated, his eyes still fixed on Emma. "Can we continue this conversation later?" he asked, a promise implied in his voice. Emma nodded, watching him walk away. She remained there in the garden, surrounded by the scent of the newly planted roses, contemplating how life could change in such unexpected ways. Later that day, Emma found Martha organizing the twins' room, carefully folding the tiny clothes that had just arrived. "You know," the governess began, her tone maternal, "in all these years I've never seen Mr. Bennett so alive. It's like a light has been lit inside him." Emma touched a small sock, marveling at its tiny size. "Things are different," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if this is real, if I won't suddenly wake up back on the streets, juggling for spare change." Martha paused her work, looking directly at Emma. "Sweetheart, sometimes the greatest miracles in life come disguised as practical arrangements. What started as a contract may turn into something much more precious." The governess's words struck something deep within Emma. She thought about how her life had changed in the past few months, not just the external circumstances but something more fundamental inside her. That night, unable to sleep, Emma walked to the library. To her surprise, she found Michael there, sitting at the rarely played piano. His hands rested on the keys, but he wasn't playing. "I didn't know you were still awake," she said softly. Michael turned, and Emma could see that he had been crying. Without a word, she moved closer, sitting beside him on the piano bench. "My mother taught me to play," he explained, his hands gently brushing the keys. "After she passed, I could never bring myself to play again. It was too painful." "And now?" Emma asked gently. In response, Michael began to play. A soft, melancholic melody filled the library, its notes carrying years of contained emotions. Emma closed her eyes, letting the music envelop her. When the last note faded into the air, Michael turned to her, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and hope. "Emma, what started as a contract has turned into something I can no longer ignore." Emma's heart quickened, recognizing the truth in his words. The babies moved gently as if they too felt the weight of the moment. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." The unspoken words between them weighed more than any signed contract. There, in the quiet of the library, surrounded by silent books and the melody still lingering in their hearts, something new and precious began to bloom, something no legal document could capture or contain. The 8th month of pregnancy brought a quiet urgency to the Bennett mansion. Emma, now carrying the twins in her prominent belly, felt more than just physical changes. There was a deep transformation taking place in her heart, one she could no longer ignore. Every movement of the baby seemed like a reminder of how much her life had changed, how much she had changed. On a quiet afternoon in May, while she was organizing the baby's room with Martha, Emma discovered an old box hidden at the back of the closet. The wood was worn by time, but it still held delicate carvings of flowers, roses she realized, on its lid. Inside, she found a small brown teddy bear, worn from decades of love, and a leather-bound blue notebook with the delicate handwriting of Sophie Bennett. It was her journal. Michael's soft voice startled her. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the notebook in Emma's hands. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that made her heart tighten. I could never bring myself to read it after she passed. It was too painful. Martha discreetly left the room, understanding the intimacy of the moment. Emma sat in the nursing chair, the journal weighing in her lap like a promise of long-held revelations. Perhaps now is the time, she suggested softly, making space for Michael, who moved closer to sit on the pouf beside her. The gentle scent of roses from the garden drifted through the open window, blending with the aroma of aged wood from the room. It was as if the very atmosphere conspired to create a perfect moment of connection. "My dear Michael," Emma began to read, her gentle voice bringing life to the words written so many years ago. "There is so much I want to say to you, so much I need you to understand. Love is not a commercial transaction. It is a gift, free from contracts and conditions. One day, you will understand that the greatest joys in life come from the most unexpected moments, from the people who enter our story without warning." Sophie's words seemed to transcend time, touching something deep within both of them. Michael picked up the teddy bear, his fingers caressing the worn fabric with a tenderness that brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Thomas and I were inseparable," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of old memories. "After my mother fell ill, he was my safe haven, the only one who could make me smile. But then came the accident." His voice faltered, decades of pain contained in that moment. Emma placed her hand over his, feeling the subtle tremor running through his fingers. "That's why the names are so important to you. They're not just names, they're connections to your past. When I found out about the twins," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength, "it felt like the universe was giving me a second chance. An opportunity to create the kind of bond one lost, to be the kind of father my uncle was to me." The baby shifted in that moment, as if responding to the intense emotions filling the room. Emma, in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, guided Michael's hand to her belly. "They already love you," she said softly. "It's incredible how they become more active when they hear your voice. It's as if they already know you're a part of them." Michael looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the world around them fade away. "And you, Emma? What do you feel?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Emma felt her heart race, knowing that her answer would change everything. The contract that had brought them together, the circumstances that had led them here, it all seemed so distant now, like a half-forgotten dream. "I feel," she began, choosing her words carefully, "that the contract that brought us here has become insignificant compared to what's growing between us. It's no longer about money or agreements. It's about family, about belonging." Michael stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The afternoon sun cast golden shadows on his profile, highlighting the tension in his shoulders. For a long moment, he simply stared at the rose garden he had planted in memory of his mother. "I'm scared," he admitted finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Scared that this is just an illusion, that you'll leave once the babies are born, taking not just them but half of my heart with you." Emma struggled to stand, her belly limiting her movements. Every step toward him felt laden with meaning, as though she were crossing not only the physical distance but also the barriers that still existed between them. "Michael," she called softly, touching his arm. "Look at me." When he turned, Emma saw all the layers of protection he had built over the years unraveling. There was only a man standing there now, vulnerable and hopeful, just like her. Two souls brought together by destiny in the most unexpected way. "What started as a contract has turned into something no paper can define," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I'm not here just for the babies or the money. I'm here because for the first time in my life, I've found a place where I truly belong. A home." Michael brought his hand to Emma's face, his touch soft as a spring breeze. "You've turned this house into a home," he said. "You've brought life back to places that had been dead for so long. It's as if my mother sent you." The moment was interrupted by Martha, who hurried into the room. "Mr. Bennett, Emma? Dr. Chin is on the phone. The results of the latest tests are in." The immediate fear in Emma's eyes was like a dark cloud crossing a clear sky. Michael, however, didn't hesitate to take her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture of unwavering support. "We'll go together," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever it is, we'll face it as a family." The word family echoed in Emma's heart like a long-forgotten song finally finding its melody. It was no longer just a word in a contract. It was a promise, a reality growing not only in her womb but in every moment shared, in every smile exchanged, in every gentle touch. As they walked together to answer the call, Emma realized that her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined when she was juggling life at that corner so many months ago. The contract that had initially united them had become nothing more than a meaningless piece of paper, replaced by something much more precious. A love that had been born in the most unexpected places of their wounded hearts. Martha watched the couple walk away, a soft smile on her time-worn lips. In all her years at the Bennett mansion, she had never seen so much love fill those walls. The ghost of loneliness that had haunted those hallways for so long was finally beginning to dissipate, replaced by the promise of infant laughter and shared moments. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, as inside the Bennett mansion, two once lonely souls discovered that sometimes the truest love is born from the most unlikely agreements. And as the twins gently moved within Emma's womb, the universe seemed to whisper that some stories are not written with ink on paper, but with love in the hearts. Sophie Bennett would be proud. Her son had finally found the kind of love she had always dreamed for him, the kind of love that transcends contracts and conventions, that is born in the most unexpected moments and flourishes in the most unlikely circumstances. In her garden, the roses swayed gently with the evening breeze, as if silently celebrating the triumph of love over loneliness. The call from Dr. Chin changed everything. "The babies are developing perfectly," she said, "but we need to bring the delivery forward. The pressure from the twins is getting too high." Emma felt Michael's hand tighten, anchoring her to the moment. Fear danced in her heart, mixed with a fierce determination to protect the two little lives she was carrying. "How much time do we have?" Michael asked, his voice firm despite the concern clearly visible in his eyes. "By tomorrow morning," the doctor replied. "I want you at the hospital by 7 o'clock. The rest of that day passed in a blur of emotions and preparations. Martha rushed around the mansion, packing for the hospital, while Michael made calls, canceling appointments and ensuring everything would be perfect for the baby's arrival. Emma stayed in the twins' room, her hands caressing her belly as she absorbed every detail of the space that had become so special. Michael's teddy bear now occupied a place of honor among the new toys, a silent reminder of the journey that had brought them here. "Are you scared?" Michael's soft voice surprised her. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with a mix of concern and adoration. "A little," she admitted, turning to face him. "Not about the delivery itself, but about everything changing." Michael crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Some changes are for the better," he said gently. "Emma, I need to tell you something before the babies are born." Her heart raced at the intensity in his gaze. Michael guided her to the armchair, kneeling in front of her. "When you came into this house, I thought I was making a business deal," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "A simple contract that would give me the heirs I so desperately wanted. But you gave me so much more than that. You brought life back into these walls, light to my darkness." Tears began to stream down Emma's face as he spoke, each word touching a deep truth in her heart. "The contract we signed doesn't mean anything to me anymore," Michael continued, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Emma recognized the legal document that had changed their lives. With a deliberate motion, he tore it into pieces. "What I want now is to build a real life with you. A true family, Michael." Emma whispered, but he gently placed a finger to her lips. "Let me finish," he asked. "I spent so long building walls around myself, protecting myself from disappointment, that I almost missed the chance to know true love. The kind of love my mother always wanted for me." From another pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. Emma held her breath. "I'm not asking because of the babies," he said softly. "I'm asking because the thought of spending even one day without you in my life now seems impossible. Emma Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring was simple and elegant, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. It wasn't a flashy piece like the ones Michael could easily buy, but something far more meaningful. "It was my mother's," he explained, noticing her gaze. "She gave it to me before she passed, saying I would know when I found the right person to wear it." Emma gently touched the ring, tears now freely flowing down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The smile that lit up Michael's face was brighter than any jewel. He slid the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, the babies moved energetically as if celebrating with their parents. Martha, who had been discreetly watching from the door, couldn't hold back her own tears of joy. In her many years of service, she had never witnessed such a profound transformation as the one Emma had brought to this house and to Michael's heart. The following morning arrived with a mix of nervousness and expectation. At the hospital, Dr. Chin conducted the delivery with precision and care. Michael never left Emma's side for a second. their hands intertwined throughout the procedure. Thomas was born first, his strong cry filling the operating room. Sophie followed 2 minutes later, her softer voice joining her brother's in perfect harmony. "They're beautiful," Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his children for the first time. "Perfect?" Emma watched the scene through her own tears. Michael Bennett, the man who once believed he could buy fatherhood with a contract, now completely transformed by the purest love that exists. In the days that followed, the Bennett mansion was filled with a joy its old walls had never known. The cries of the babies, the lullabies, the soft laughter. Every sound was music to the hearts that lived within. One afternoon, as Emma was breastfeeding Sophie and Michael was rocking Thomas, Martha entered the room with a curious expression. "I found this in the attic," she said, handing Michael a yellowed envelope. "It's your mother's handwriting?" Michael carefully opened the envelope, his voice faltering as he read the words. "My dear son, when you find true love, it will come in the most unexpected way. Do not be afraid to open your heart. Love is the only thing that grows when shared." Emma looked at her new family, the babies in her arms, the man she loved by her side, the ring on her finger softly shining in the sunlight. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something far more precious. A love that had blossomed under the most improbable circumstances and flourished beyond all expectations. In the garden, the roses of Sophie Bennett continued to bloom, silent witnesses to how true love has the power to transform lives, heal broken hearts, and create families in the most unexpected places. And so, what began as a cold contract ended as the most beautiful love story, a reminder that sometimes, we have to lose everything to find exactly what our hearts have always been searching for. Did you enjoy this heartfelt story? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. If you want more intense stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Life Stories channel. Your support helps us continue bringing more exciting adventures like this one. Until the next story.